Steve, can I start by just asking you to give just a brief introduction of yourself, so folks know a little bit about who you are and why you know so much about this topic?
Okay, cool. Yeah, without taking too long, because this could be an hour-long conversation. But yeah, my name is Steve Horseman, and it's odd because I ended up doing a lot of work with horses and trying to help men understand relationships and women. Everyone thought I changed my name just so it would sound good, but it's actually my name. It's spelled differently too. So, and I did become one of those cliche men who got into the his 20s, 30s, 40s, and just starting his 50th birthday when he found out that his wife wasn't happy. What I learned about men in marriage is that we men tend to go through life as kind of a laundry list of to-do things. You get this done, you go get a job, you make money, get a mortgage, get a riding lawnmower if you can, get a couple of black labs, and try to check off the list of how to do life. And it's kind of what we learned from the people before us, our dads. And so by the time you get in your 40s or 50s, and the relationship, which is called marriage, this romantic committed sexual thing that people invented, and one of the people aren't happy in the marriage. And what I learned is that sometimes it's the woman, sometimes 60 to 70% of the time, becomes unsettled or discontented before he does. And then he finds out that things are falling apart. And this is that gaping hole in your gut, in your heart, that happened to me back in 2012, when I found out that everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I created, everything I thought was going to be my future, suddenly was not going to be anymore. And it is one of the most crushing, unsettling feelings ever. And I'm chuckling now because we use humor so much now, because it's all such a cliche when we start to learn it. So many men have this story. And when the story of redemption, the story of reclaiming your personal power and confidence and mojo, and knowing that not everything is in your control, and part of our distress is because of that, it caused me to create this business called Good Guys to Great Men, because I saw all of us as just really good guys doing what we thought we should do. And but we didn't know how to be a man, and so things hit us, and there's this 13-year-old version of us that overreacts when a woman pulls away or says I'm not happy, or I think we need space or time apart, or I want a divorce, I love you but I'm not in love with you. It makes that 13-year-old version of our good little boy just fall apart. And what happens then is sadness, crying, anger, pleading, begging, compromising, negotiating. It's just a mess. And so what I found out when I got my own personal help back then, in my own men's group, in my own mentor, my own coach, is that there is a way of thinking about all of this stuff at a much higher level that takes away the pain, that takes away the excruciating, devastating feeling that you have when you go through this. And it was so powerful. And I got a little angry that nobody taught me any of these things when I was younger. And I had to become this middle-aged guy. And but it was liberating as heck, and it made me realize that the best decades in my life were yet to come, and that is the transformation from good guy to great man. You realize that everything that's happened up to this point had to happen. It was part of the process, and it had to get you to pay attention to the next 10 years that are going to be better than the last. And that's what I love to teach. It's what I love to talk about. That's how you and I met, obviously, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, Steve, there, like you said, that could be just a whole hour-long conversation itself, right there. There's so much we could dig into. But on a very simple level, it really sounds like what you're giving, helping your clients rediscover, giving back to them is that future. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a way of thinking about the future that doesn't have dependence on what other people do, decide, what other people think, what other people um, think about you. There's a very stoic philosophy that revolves around being outcome independent, to know that you can have goals and preferences in your life, but let's get real about what you actually control, and have some grace and maturity and inner peace about the things that change that you never controlled anyway. And that's what I learned, because we all were taught that marriage is supposed to be the ceremony that instills certainty into your life. The act of marriage, the vows and the ceremony and the witnesses, all create a certainty that you'll never have your heart broken. You'll never be surprised. You'll never be devastated. And we all know there's a mathematical reality to this with divorce rates. Half of us don't get through that that way. And so with this chuckling realization that reality is going to move whether or not you want it to, you have to decide you're going to have a relationship with circumstances that don't devastate you. And it doesn't, it requires a deep sense of empathy and understanding of the woman's journey as well. So you stop demonizing her feelings, her thoughts, her reactions, her prior childhood, everything that causes her to have a journey which may lead her away from you. If you demonize it and villainize it and become a victim of it, you are pretty much doomed to another 20 years of misery. That's what I want to help guys avoid.
And I love that you say that because that's how so many men start out trying to cope, right? The pain is so much, it's so overwhelming. But maybe if I can villainize her and it's her fault and she's the one who broke the vows, right? She's the one who took away the certainty. Now, somehow that makes me feel a little better now. But what actually happens over time is that then you're never free from that.
Yeah, yeah.
And you see that a lot here on YouTube. I see that in the comments, a lot of men who are stuck in that anger and stuck in that blame.
Yeah, for the guys listening, I never want to offend a fellow brother, but we all have to get to a point. I'm 61 now, so I laugh about some of my prior behavior and thinking that nobody was supposed to ever hurt me. Nobody was supposed to ever lie to me, cheat on me, betray me. Nobody was supposed to ever do that. And that's just ridiculous. We have no control over what the world and other people, even the person you married. And so there's the childish part of us, a 13-year-old part of most of us guys who we don't want to own the fact that life goes on and that we're responsible for either moving forward with resentment and anger and hate, or we can move forward with compassion and grace and empathy. And if you choose the first one, I guarantee you that your life will suck. So I say, you better hope I'm right about this. You better hope I'm right and you're wrong. That the hate and the anger that you've got in your YouTube comments about all women this, all women that, and all your red pill philosophy, you better hope you're not right because that's just a recipe for a very toxic kind of acidic living philosophy. And for guys who recover through this in a good way, there's really, really good things on the other side of divorce. There really are.
Stephen, in just a moment, I want to kind of flip the focus and talk about the good things.
Yeah.
But just while we're on this topic, just yesterday I had a client ask me a question that I loved because I think for so many men who are in that place where they feel that anger and that resentment and are trying to figure out how to move past it, I think a lot of
Mhm.
them have this question. He said, well, he's like, I see that. I don't want to stay in resentment. I don't want this to take over my life, but doesn't she have some responsibility? Doesn't she have some responsibility to own her actions, her role in what happened? And it felt to him like if he finds that compassion, that forgiveness, that he's like basically saying it's okay and that she's right and like that almost that she's getting a free pass. How do you respond to that
Again,
message?
that is the most common question you and I get, right? Well, when are we going to start holding women accountable for their actions and their beliefs and their blah 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 blah? As if holding other people accountable, and I'm going to get philosophical here, as if it's such a thing that other people have to be held accountable. You know, we'll do this even driving. Oh, who's going to hold that person accountable for driving too fast? And who's going to hold that person accountable for driving too slow? George Carlin said, everyone who drives faster than you is an idiot. Everyone who drives slower is an asshole. Well, we tend to do this in relationships. When are we going to hold her accountable? As if holding her accountable is going to provide you any relief. The thing is that you never owned her. You don't have a title to her mind, her brain, her body. You don't have the ownership over anything.
Yeah.
It's not up to you to hold people accountable. Now, I know being a man that all of us at that point of reckoning, when we found out what was going on, it would have felt amazing to hear, you know what? I've realized that I could have been better. I wasn't honest with you. I feel so much shame and I just want to apologize. You're such a good man. I love you so much. I just can't be with you anymore. And I just want you to know that this is as much my fault as anything. And,
All of
and
the Yeah.
we create a movie scene of the perfectly scripted apology that would have somehow made everything okay. And it's bullshit. It's just not true. And so when a man understands why apologizing and admitting wrongdoing, or if it's infidelity or cheating or anything like that, and then coming forward with a genuine apology, it's very, very hard for human beings in general. And for many women, it's excruciating because they're already living in a lot of shame, and admitting that they were wrong or broken or to blame is only pouring acid in their own shame. And so, what men don't understand about women who fall out of love and become unhappy and start imagining divorce, there's a lot of pain going on that he didn't have anything to do with. And there becomes an empathetic view that if I really loved her, if I really loved her, I mean, really loved her, I would allow her to search whatever she needs to feel whole again, even if it doesn't include me, which is the ultimate level of agape love or unconditional love. A 13-year-old boy is not capable of that because he wants his damn apology and he wants accountability. And so, Good Guys to Great Men helps us move past that boyish need and expectation that the world's supposed to say the right things to pacify us, and accept that sometimes people do what they have to do for reasons that don't have anything to do with us. And when you accept that, that liberates you to be gracious, liberates you to have empathy, and also liberates you to move on.
Yeah, that's maybe the biggest piece, right? Is
Yeah,
it helps you let go. Um,
yeah, let go. Yeah.
Steve, that I love that you use the 13-year-old boy, that's kind of the internal part that struggles with this piece. Um, my sense from working with my clients around this is that part of that holding on, part of that trying to hold her accountable is about the future also. Because if she's not accountable for this, well, then what's going to happen next, right? If I really admit that I can't control any of this, then that uncertainty of what's coming becomes even more daunting. Is that something, do you feel like that's a piece of it, or do you think it's about something else, this holding on to
You
control and
mean if he gets
accountability?
divorced and moves on?
If he gets divorced and moved on, and if he really accepts that she could make this choice, that she could be in
Yeah.
this place of pain and need to not be with him, and he can't control it, the jump that I often hear is, well, then what now? How on earth now do I move into a new relationship knowing that this kind of change is possible?
Yeah. The way I answer that, it's also philosophical, but it's a principle that you either decide to adopt or not. And one is that we don't have any control over outcomes. We never have and never will. The other thing about relationships, especially a committed monogamous sexual relationship, whether it's marriage or just being together in that agreement, that there is a certain fear that we bring when we're feeling insecure and immature in our body, even as 50-year-old men in a new relationship. And I got in a new one 9 years ago. And I had the same things like, geez, why would I do this again? And what I learned in the work that I did is that the only reason you would do it again is because you want to and you choose to trust. It's not necessarily that you trust her not to break your heart. You trust her to love you forever and never see you in the bad light, never to leave. You can't trust that because you have no control over that. You have to trust that you're worthy enough to be in relationship. You have to trust that you're a valuable person who has your own set of sovereignty. And that if you go day to day with that instead of worrying about the future, then you're going to be okay because your trust and your hope is in that you will feel what you need to feel. You'll decide what you need to decide. You'll respond the way you need to respond without needing to control things through fear. The fear of divorce is one of the biggest causes of divorce. I know that's the thing I was going to start with. I buried my lead there. The fear of divorce is one of the biggest causes of divorces because when men act fearfully, we become tyrants. We control, we become tricksters and manipulators. We become interrogators and it's compromisers. We're not authentic. We don't state what we want. We don't speak our truth. We're always trying to avoid the pain of future devastation. And if you're afraid of divorce, if you're afraid to lose somebody, you can't even be with them in a loving way because everything in your brain is trying to orchestrate an outcome. It's on the defense. It's never in a loving offense, which is a giving energy instead of a prevention defense, right? Everybody who knows football knows what I'm talking about. And so the fear of divorce causes men to do things that cause divorce. And so what we work on is trying to help men free their mind of fear so you can be present right now. This thing you and I are doing right now at this very moment. In about 5 seconds, everything's going to be good. I have to believe 10 seconds from now, you and I are going to be good. I've got no control over the next 2 minutes. And so all I can do is be here with you, look at you, and relate to you authentically, and just have faith that, this is all going to work out. This thing we're doing, this podcast, we could crash and burn, right? We have no idea, but we're here right now, and we both have faith. This it's good. Let's just look at each other with the highest level of regard and grace instead of assuming that somebody's up to something.
Mm.
That's what young people do. They assume everybody's up to something, trying to hurt them or
Yeah,
persuade them.
yeah. That I love that focus on that present moment, right? Because it is the only place where we can control anything. All I can control is what I do right now, and what I say, and how I show up in this second, in this
Right now,
moment.
yeah,
I can't change what I did 10 seconds ago. I can't change what's going to happen 10 seconds from now. Yeah. Uh,
yeah.
so
This is deep stuff, isn't it? I mean, how do you just flip a switch and put your brain in that mode?
I mean, that's the struggle, right? Is that this all sounds so good, this philosophical approach. Like, yeah, it sounds good, but what, so many of the men I talk to, they've been married for 25 years, right?
Mhm,
35 years since they were 20 years old. Like their entire, really adult experience is with
mhm,
this one partner.
mhm.
And then that's ending, and it is so scary, right? Everything that's familiar, everything I know is it's not going to be that way, and everything I imagined it was going to be, all those dreams, that shared future, isn't going to be. So yeah, that is really the meat of it, is the how do
Yeah,
I step into, and how do I get there? And obviously that's, you and I both know there's a process, right? That's why
yeah,
we both have programs, because it isn't a magic flip the switch, let me tell you in 5 words in this, you know, podcast
yeah.
video.
We know the fears, the stated fears are, oh my God, how could this happen? We have so much history. What about the kids? What about the money? What about the divorce math? What about what we used to mean to each other? What about our vows? What about me failing? I don't want to be a failure. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to feel abandoned. And those fears are high level fears. You and I have to work with people at a deeper place that why are you so afraid of being alone? Why are you so afraid of being a failure? Why are you so afraid that this will devastate your children? And so there's a fear below that any of us who've gone through divorce with our own parents, which I have, um, there's a fear of just not being good enough, which is a shame-based kind of fear. And most guys that I work with and you work with are successful men in the world of business and money and corporate development, entrepreneurship. I can't even say that word, entrepreneurship. They're kind of killing it. They're doing pretty well. And they've developed a set of skills and knowledge and competencies that they've become very well respected for. And in fact, they're pretty good at controlling outcomes in that world of doing stuff. And so they've come to expect that, well, I can control stuff here. Why not here? It's because the relationship of love with another person does not follow the physics of business and money making. It's totally different. And that's what I have to help guys with is know that you've never had control, and that there's only one way that I know for the guys who do turn their relationships around, and after months or years they come back together and say, "Holy crap, that was intense. We learned a lot. Now what does our new marriage look like?" And I love that. That's the Cinderella story I love. The only guys who get that Cinderella story are the ones who completely let go and learn the wisdom of stop grabbing on so tightly and squeezing the love out of the relationship.
Um, which, I mean, it's so true, but it's like a tragic irony, right? Is that it's in the moment when you fully let go that there could be the possibility
Yeah.
of feeling that love come back in.
Yeah. Well, I'll often hear wives say that it was at that moment where I first felt the most loved I've ever felt with you in our marriage, that you said you loved me enough to let me go.
Mm.
and he swallows hard and he wants to cry and he can't believe that. Have you never felt my love before? Because most of us try to show love through what we provide and what we give, what we do,
Yeah.
as opposed to who we are being. And
Mhm.
most people want to feel loved exactly for who they are without conditions, to be fully accepted. And a lot of us go through marriage not feeling that. And yes, guys listening, I didn't feel that for my wife either. She wasn't doing it for me. That means us humans are mostly bad at it. But the only thing I can address is my role in it, that I wasn't that great at it either.
Yeah.
And part of her reason for wanting to leave is to feel seen and heard and understood and connected in ways that she just wanted to feel in her body and her heart that she couldn't feel with me and didn't feel with me. I recognize my role in that. I also recognize her her childhood role in that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, you have the 13-year-old boy. She has the 5, 7, 10, 16-year-old woman, girl.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it took a
So,
lot of empathy for me to relax with the idea, to accept that what happened was supposed to happen.
mm,
What were you going to
so
say?
not tell me more about that because I think that piece for going into the future is so important. That what happened was supposed to happen. How do you know it was supposed to happen so that what happened for you?
Hmm. This is a choice, a belief system. This is an operating principle you can either buy or not buy. I'm not selling anything here. I'm just telling guys that I work with, if you choose not to buy this principle, it's a much harder road. And the principle is that I know it was supposed to happen because it did happen. And that sounds so weird. Like, what does that mean? It was supposed to happen because it did happen. And that means because it did happen, I have the responsibility and the opportunity to respond to it in a way where I learn something, I become wiser, I become deeper, I become better. And I want to believe that. I want to believe that when bad things happen to good people, you don't spend a year mourning the fact that it happened. You scratch your head and go, wow, what and I like to chuckle a lot because everything's funny to me. What am I supposed to learn from this? What am I supposed to learn? And my first epiphany was the weirdest thing is that I would teach a horse training. Um, the couple years before my divorce, I got into horse training. I was hiring horse trainers and running training clinics, reading books on horse training, crying right, at the vulnerability of horses and the whispering techniques that makes a horse just totally trust you and do everything you want it to do, and it will put its head on your shoulder, even when it doesn't trust other people. If you know how to relate to a horse, you'll get total cooperation and total love and respect with the horse if you know what you're doing. And I was into this crap. And then during my divorce, I realized that everything I believed in about horses, I never applied to my marriage. Not even one. Not even one. And it was like, God, what a dope. All this stuff, these principles about pressure and giving and receiving and respecting and giving space and um, all of that stuff. I did the opposite. In my marriage, I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. Pressure, 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 criticize, criticize, judge, 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 whine, 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 complain, complain, argue, argue. If you want to have a miserable relationship with a horse, do all that stuff. If you want to have a miserable relationship with a woman, do all that stuff. Um, and so it was this epiphany. It was a two by four in the head. Which, how did I come to be so wise about men and horses getting along? And I never made the parallel to all the bad things I was doing in my relationship. And they're not bad things, they're just expectedly immature things that I was doing when I was afraid of not getting the love and affection and touch and adoration that I craved from my wife. I thought I could force it. I thought I could negotiate it. I thought I could trick it back into existence. And the harder I tried and the harder I held on, the harder she resisted and pulled away and finally resulted in my divorce. Feel like I went off on a tangent there.
No, yeah, I think you did a pretty good job though of coming full circle on that question because you said part of what helps you make your peace with divorce and move forward is that it was supposed to happen.
It was a lesson. And that was the lesson. I was all about lessons in horsemanship, and I didn't realize that there were lessons that men are supposed to learn about relationship and love and women that nobody teaches us. Our dads don't teach us this, which is why I do what I do. Why you do what you do. Um,
And so much of this, I feel like, needs to just, whether it's men or women, basic relationship skills and communication and emotional process. It's stuff we should be learning in kindergarten, right? But we just don't. We really get taught all of the wrong things to do, right?
yeah,
By the example of our parents and our teachers and our movies, TV shows.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a very competitive model. And at its root, competition is great in sports. I'm a competitor. I'm an ex-jock. I love ping pong. I like to win at ping pong. But you come into a relationship, there's an insecure competitiveness for attention, time, and touch, affection, is significance, respect, adoration. There's all kinds of competition. And a lot of guys will keep a scoreboard on the big wall in the living room as to how much he's been giving and how much he's been getting. And he's got a score kept all the time. He knows how many times he's asked for sex and he didn't get it. He can give you the stats on a spreadsheet, right? If not, just repeat them from his memory. And there's a competitive mode I think we're taught early on that, especially with the gender wars, and boys are stupid and girls are stupid, and we're kind of fed this line where we get into competition and resentment for not getting what we want. And there's a whole nother game to play. It's an easier game for men, and that's what I teach. The easier game is compassion, empathy, understanding, playfulness, right? Let's play at this. Let's stop competing. Let's just play the game and have fun together.
Yeah. I I love that piece too, the playfulness instead of the competition.
Yeah.
It brings in a sense of being on the same team and playing together instead of playing against each other. Uh,
Perfect. Yeah, I totally agree.
which makes me wonder now, Steve, because you were talking about the outcome, right? And we can't control the outcome, and we have to let that go if we want to be at peace, if we want to be happy in this human experience. But it also does sound like you're talking about playing the game in a different way, which is having an impact on the outcome, at least as far as that relationship unfolds. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because I know for a lot of men going forward, that's the question, whether it's attempting to reconcile with their ex-wife or it's moving into a new relationship. What can we influence? And how do you speak to men about that piece? Is there, and maybe it's less about influencing the outcome than it is the process, but I'm curious how you'd speak to that piece.
Yeah. There's a book that I really enjoy, and a lot of men will read it, and I'll give it the title here in a second, and get an epiphany about the process of being in a relationship. Um, so many marriage counselors have tried to convince everyone that the only secret to connecting and getting along and happily ever after is working on your communication, as if you don't know the English language well enough to communicate. And it's been the biggest fallacy and the biggest reason why the success rate of marriage counseling itself is pretty darn low. There's another C word, which isn't communicating or talking about problems and solving problems and staying in this low mood of the things are wrong in our relationship. The other C word is connection. And
Mm.
that's what's not taught in counseling or even pre-marriage therapy. You're taught to make agreements and compromise and negotiate, right? And just kind of get along. And if mom ain't happy, nobody's happy. Really bad advice. In the book, The Relationship Handbook by George Pransky, he makes such a beautiful case for if two people can be clear enough, intentional enough, compassionate enough to focus on connection, the relationship becomes easy. But you have to understand the deeper sense of how people feel connected. Goes deeper than just the five love languages. But just understanding, and I'll say this to a guy, when your wife is alone with her girlfriends having a happy hour drink, and she's talking about you and your marriage, how do you think she talks about it? How does she represent your thinking? How does she represent your energy as a husband to other people? And he'll go, well, I know. I probably said we do the best we can. We have our ups and our downs. Things are good, sometimes they're bad, but we do the best we can, and eventually we get over it. And I said that sounds like a low bar. That's it. what would it take for her to go, what's that?
Like, is that really where you want to be? Like,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that your aspiration here?
that's your aspiration. I just want her to say, we do the best we can. Every now and then a woman will show up to a gathering with her friends and they hate her because all of them are talking badly about their husbands behind his back, everything that's wrong and how stupid he is, blah, blah, blah. And they look at her and go, why aren't you talking badly? And she says, I actually really love my husband. He's not perfect, but guess what? Neither am I. And what we found out is that when we treat each other with the highest level of regard and benefit of the doubt, even drinking with my girlfriends, I want to let you know that I think highly of him and that although he's not perfect and he screws up, I want him to know that I believe in the best in him. And when he does that for me, you girls can't imagine how good the sex is. Right? Say something like that because there's total acceptance. And it takes a really mature and a secure person to be able to live in a relationship like that. Because to do that, you have to drop the scoreboard, the competition. And that's what I tell the guy that you're talking about. This is what's possible. If you save your marriage, it's going to be done that way. If you have a great relationship after your marriage, it has to be done this way. You have to let go of all the hurts and the pains and the doubts and the fears and the skepticism and the cynicism you were talking about and start holding people in higher regard all the time, even when you don't think they deserve it. It's funny, we can do this for children sometimes. Some parents don't do it well with children, but we can do it easier with children than the object of our romantic love.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I find that's often an in for a lot of my clients when they're having a hard time holding themselves in high regard, is to go back and visit the 13-year-old boy or the 10-year-old boy and really try to see and experience him from the outside. And I found it's almost impossible to not have compassion, empathy, and hold that child in high regard and see him as doing the best he could. Um, I like that idea when we're struggling with our romantic partners to give them that benefit of the doubt. Can we maybe look at them through that lens, knowing that it's their 13-year-old, 10-year-old, 8-year-old self that we're
Yeah.
really talking to in that moment?
In my Perfect. You just reminded me in my marriage, whenever my 13-year-old boy, and he's still with me, guys, those of you who are listening, he's still there. We still have conversations all the time. I mean, I never know what's going to trigger him. I just have to know that when it happens, he's going to go, hey, and I'm going to go, what? It's like he's sitting here next to me. Did you hear what she said? Yeah, yeah, I know. So I have to father him. I have to father that little guy because he's very reactive and you don't see it coming. But what I realized, God, I'm almost losing my train of thought. Oh, when you find out that you're operating from that immature 13-year-old boy space, it's impossible to give high regard. Until you have a high regard for your own value, your own sense of worthiness, your own gift that you bring to the relationship, high regard for your own strength and your own masculine value as a father, a husband, a lover. If you don't have that, you cannot give anybody else high regard. When you're hurting, it's hard to be compassionate and empathetic. That's why this work, the coaching work, is to always come back to the fear behind the fear that maybe I do suck. Maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe I'm unattractive. Maybe I'm no good in bed. Maybe she just thinks that I'm not as good as the other men she's met. It's this worthiness thing that you have to work on because as soon as you fix that, you become generous. And generosity is really one of the foundations of a good relationship.
Yeah.
Give, not give to get, but should be a give competition.
That unconditional, right? That
Yeah,
I'm loving you because I'm choosing to love you and not because I want something back from you or need. Because
yeah.
it's more often not that I want something back, it's I need that validation of my own worth back. And if I'm not getting it, then that child comes out and
First thing I teach them about is the concept of intimacy. Most guys use the word intimacy thinking they're being clever, that they can use that and sound smart without using the word sex, because they equate the word intimacy with,
that's
penis
interesting.
and vagina sex. Like that's what intimacy is.
Okay.
And I said, do you know about the other types? And they go, what do you mean? The other types. And there's articles and books written about intimacy. There's 4 types or 5 or 8 types. And The four that I usually use are the emotional intimacy that you and I are sharing right now. We're being so open with each other. This is very emotional conversation. There's intellectual intimacy, which is trusting each other, not to think the other person's stupid. And we're sharing intimacy here right now. You and I are also talking about some fairly philosophical and spiritual notions.
Mm.
So you and I right now have emotional, intellectual, and spiritual intimacy, and it's very connecting. It just feels really good to me. I don't know about you. I can't control you, so I don't care. Right? It's outcome independence. I don't care what your experience is. I am loving this conversation, and if we could fist bump through the screen, then we would have physical intimacy, right? And you don't have to have sex to create this incredible feeling of high regard and appreciation and adoration for who the person is. And guess what leads to actual sex? It's those feelings of connectedness in the emotional and spiritual, intellectual realm. Um, and that's what I tell guys. That's my answer to your question. Now, let's get real. Some guys who are 35 and they still have 35-year-old level testosterone and libido, there is a total pornified performance level anxiety they have about sexuality and people liking them and getting abs and all the stuff that you need to do. And there is a very strong physical component to being sexually confident. But as you age, as you get 40, 50, 60 years old, you realize the physical component is still important, but it has to be preceded by something deeper, something more meaningful. And so what I do is teach guys to get back to the basics. One thing we use a staircase of intimacy to talk about all the small tries, all the small things you can do to connect before you even think about initiating something like intercourse. And so that's the first thing. It's an intellectual dive into what intimacy really is that your dad never told you. And like most guys, I learned everything I knew from Playboy and Penthouse. So that was my education.
Yeah.
Turns out that it's not all true.
It's not telling the whole story.
I am afraid to announce to the world that it's not the whole story.
Mm.
Yeah.
Steve, uh, there's so many places we could go with this conversation of sex, but something that really just struck me is when you were talking about intimacy and all the ways that you and I are having an intimate conversation and connection right now. And you said,
Mhm.
I'm loving it. I'm feeling it. I don't know if you are, but honestly, I don't really care because I can't control you. And I'm having this experience right now. That just struck me because that's that freedom that you get when you let go of needing to control the outcome, right? Because you get to be having, and I am loving it and I am feeling that too, but I don't actually know if I'm feeling what you're feeling because I can't feel what you're feeling, right? I can only feel what I'm feeling, and it feels really good to me, right? So we both get to have this amazing experience in connection, but ultimately it doesn't really matter what the other person's internal experience is. Um, that piece, I mean, maybe that's like too much of a deep dive off into that philosophical cliff, but I find that piece is so fascinating just when it comes to the whole concept of love in the first place, because we think of love as something like I give you love, so you feel loved, and then you give me love back, and I feel loved, and we have this reciprocal transactional love.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
really, if I love you, I feel that love, right? I get to feel it. I can't make you feel it. So then that unconditional love really becomes it's there if you want to receive it in
The
whatever way you
gift. Yeah.
choose to receive it, but I get to experience it. And it sounds like when you talk about intimacy that way, that's true kind of all the way across the board from love through that intimacy and even into sex.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
You're making me think about guys who are worried about dating. Um, And I say, imagine you're on a sidewalk. You're one of these pedestrian areas in an old part of town, umbrellas, and there's just food and beer, and it's just people walking. It's a great summer day. And most guys, a lot of women don't know this about men, that we are saps. We're absolute suckers for the romance story. As I could paint picture about the color of the umbrellas, and he's on a second date with a woman who's wearing a dress that just is, she's a knockout. In every respect, he just likes her mind, her body. And she sits down and asks for a glass of red wine, and they start talking. And she says, last time we talked, I had a really good time, but there's something personal I wanted to ask you. And he goes, what? I'm an open book. You can ask me anything. She goes, I'm just curious why you got divorced. I mean, what actually happened? Why did you get divorced? And what do you think now? What did you learn? And I help guys, we spend an hour and a half on this topic, not to come up with the perfect line, but to come up with the truth. So he could take a sip of beer, look up at the sun, and say, okay, I'm going to answer you. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I feel about this. And he's going to tell her what he learned. That intimacy that's built right there on that date is a lot like this conversation you and I are having. I mean, for the viewers, they could pretend you and I are on a date having an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
The only thing I regret is that you're interviewing me, so you're the one asking me all the questions. And so I don't get to ask you, and it feels one-sided here. I'll just tell you that. If it was a real date, I say, "Can I ask you a question? Like, can you be quiet for a minute? I want to ask you about your husband and all that stuff." That would be weird if you're married on a date. Anyway, for the viewers, it is the quality of the conversation. It's the openness. It's the vulnerability, and so you stop worrying about sex. You realize that the best sex you've ever had was never planned. It was never strategized. You didn't have a board out with a bunch of chess pieces. I mean, the best sex you've ever had was never actually expected. It just happened. And that's a faithfulness there that if you pay attention to intimacy and connection and authenticity, let it happen. Just stop worrying about it.
There's um there's something so freeing right there, Steve, right? Because when it comes to dating, and I think especially if you've been married for a long time and now you're coming out into this world where there's all this online dating and we've been through all of the COVID and it's daunting and it's
Mm,
overwhelming. And what are the rules and how do you play the game and what do people expect and what are you, and I've had guys be like, well, what do I do? We go on the date. Am I supposed to, do I pay for an Uber for her? Like, what's the right, like there's all the little details of who does what. And do you pay for dinner or is that chauvinistic now? And like, and what you're saying is just let it all go and tell the truth, right? Just be authentic and real and that allow that to create the connection and the intimacy, which will
mm.
naturally lead to great sex, to great relationships, to good connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole who pays and all that stuff. Guys get caught up on convention and things that they think they're supposed to do. They wonder a lot. Guys can wonder. We talk about leadership in dating and not being dominant, but leading the discomfort. Right, first date, you just bring it up. If you're a leader and you're not outcome dependent, and you want to buy dinner, you say, "Hey, before we get started, I want to ask you if it would be okay with you if we just agreed that I get to pay for dinner tonight. If we're lucky enough to have a second date, you can pay if you feel like it. But just to avoid awkwardness, do you mind if I pay for stuff tonight?" And she would go, "Well, probably," but at least bring it out. Stop pretending. Stop waiting for the moment when the check comes and you don't know what's going to happen. A good friend of mine, a lady named Grace, said she had two dates in a row. And I just have to tell you the story for the guys to demonstrate the masculine energy and the leadership that she said was so pronounced on two different dates. Like on Thursday, she had a date with a guy she really connected with online, and she's sitting in the restaurant, and she's sitting there 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Finally, around 25, she's getting ready to pack up and go. And thinks she's been stood up. And here he comes busting through the door with the front tire of his bicycle on. He's sweaty and he had his bike helmet on. And he said, "Oh my God, I had a flat tire and I lost my phone or my phone wasn't charging. I got to pee really bad. Oh, where's the bathroom? Oh, can you order me a beer?" Right. And I don't know how you're feeling. Right? She said, I was flabbergasted with what a little boy had just shown up in his bicycle suit and his panic and all his anxiety and his nervousness and it was just ridiculous. And that turns out to be his main personality. So when he finally did sit down for dinner, the whole thing was like that. Everything was about him. Friday, she has a date and she shows up to a different restaurant and he's early. And he remembered she mentioned something about Pinot Noir and he had ordered a glass and already had it. He already decided where he'd like her to sit so he could see the rest of the restaurant. And he asked her to sit down. He mentioned where the restrooms were because he knew she had like a 45-minute drive to get there. And they had she said the energy between guy number one and guy number two was so clear that the second guy knew who he was, what he believed in, what he wanted. He didn't pressure anything. He was prepared, and he just made me feel safe. He even picked the chair so I would have a better view, and also so he could see around too. He actually knew where the bathrooms were, and he remembered the wine. It didn't take much effort. So the lesson for guys listening is that leadership doesn't require dominance or coercion. Leadership means just having an idea, having a plan, taking care of business, stating the obvious, and not getting caught up in questions.
Yeah. It's such a good story, Steve. There's also such a clear difference there, right? In just where the focus is. The first guy, the focus is all on me and everything that's happening and going wrong and out of my control and stressed out. And the other guy is just focused on what does she need? What would make her more comfortable? And
Yeah,
that's almost the leadership right there, right? Is I'm thinking about
that's it.
what other people need because I have to as the leader. I can't be caught up in my own bullshit, my own worries, my own stress, because then I'm not taking care of anyone else. Wow,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot in that story. That's a powerful one.
I
Thank
tell
you.
that a lot to demonstrate the two energies.
Yeah.
One is a 13-year-old, and the other one is a grown ass
Yeah. Very simple.
man.
Well, Steve, we have just a few minutes left here. And I know this has felt kind of one-sided. And you said you want to ask me something. Would you like to, in this last few minutes, is there something you'd like to ask me?
There was one question I had when I was telling you the story about the ladies at happy hour and all of them complaining about their husbands, except the one who said, well, I actually really love my husband. How would it make you feel if you were a fly on a wall and your husband, I know he was a professional chef, and he was after work and people were sitting around kind of bitching about relationships and marriage, and he said exactly what I said she said about you. Now you don't know this, you're just a fly on the wall and you got to watch it. How would that feel to you?
And just so I'm clear that what the second woman said, but like I really love my
Yeah.
husband and yeah.
Yeah, and he says that about you. And what he says is like it just blows your mind that you almost didn't know that he thought about you that way.
So
What would it feel like?
I am really lucky, Steve, because I actually know exactly what it feels like because I've gotten to have that experience.
Mm,
I've been with my husband for 11 years and we've been married, he would know, 6 or 7. Um,
mhm,
and he does speak about me in that way and he always has. And I know that mostly from what other people tell me. I often have people say, wow, you should hear the way he talks about you. And it's crazy. You asked how would I feel? And I can, when I'm just saying that, I can feel myself choking up a little and getting emotional, almost
mhm,
brings tears to my eyes. Because I think that word that you used earlier, feeling safe.
mhm,
And I feel very loved and very safe and very cherished by him. And just
mhm,
knowing that that is what he shares about me. And honestly, I also feel, and this has been true, I think, through my whole relationship with him, is that it's also inspiring to me. It's something for me to aspire to set aside my own 13-year-old girl and her judgments and fears and complaints and criticisms. If I notice them creeping into, how am I thinking about him? What story am I telling about him? Am I being as generous and cherishing him as much as I know he does me when he talks about me?
yeah.
So yeah,
And that's what every guy was wondering when you were talking, and I'll speak for them.
yeah.
Oh, great. Well, that's great. He does that for you. Do you do that for him? And don't bother answering. They already know the answer. But sometimes it's a struggle on the bad days. Like he's worked a 15-hour day and now he comes home grumpy and he doesn't pay attention or whatever. And then there's this regard we have to have for each other that we're all doing the best we can. Even with 15-hour days and having an upset stomach and then getting cut off in traffic. And um, love is not supposed to be easy. In fact, one of the best quotes I ever heard is that marriage is not a place where you're supposed to go to be happy. it's a place where we learn how to love. And if you can't figure it out there, you won't find it anywhere. Um,
That that's such a good way to simplify it. It's a place you go to learn how to love because then it becomes about the process too. Right? Because it's not perfect and I'm not perfect at it. And yes, he speaks very well about me. And that's so touching, but he's not perfect at it either. But I do feel very blessed in my partnership that I do feel like we're constantly both trying to figure out how to love better and how to move
mm,
through those blocks and those stuck places. And something that I find has been a struggle for me, I think, my whole life in my relationships, and that I'm still working my way through is how I respond to anger. And I don't know if this is,
mm.
I haven't worked with
Your own
someone,
or his?
his, um, and
Okay.
honestly, anyone's. It's been really valuable for me to have the experience of working with my clients' anger. And I haven't talked to enough women about this to really say if this is kind of women in general, or if this is my personal journey and story. But what I see both in my own relationship and with a lot of my clients is that for a lot of men, and I think women too, when there's pain or fear, we often respond with anger. But that anger can look so strong, right? Because that's kind of what it is. It's the like, I'm strong enough, I can't be hurt, that it can be hard to see past and behind it to the fear. And so that's really where,
Yeah.
I'm finding I'm very good at that with my clients, holding space for their anger and seeing them through their anger. I'm not as good at it with my husband. Um, and so that's my journey is can I see the injured part or the wounded part when he's and I say anger, I mean he's never angry at me. He's a very but he gets frustrated at the world. And I think that for so many men, I hear that across so many of my clients, is that the world right now and so many things that are happening in it isn't a world that's really for men in so many ways. And I think a lot of men feel very out of place in the world. And that is a source of frustration and anger. And, then all the little daily things from the drive to what happens in the grocery store to what you see on the news can be so frustrating. And I notice my response to frustration is to pull away from it or to judge it or to
Yeah.
criticize it or say you shouldn't be, instead of seeing past it and trying to understand, well, what is the pain? Like, why are you feeling that? So that's where I'm at in my personal
Mm.
journey, is I can hold that space
Thanks for
well for my
sharing that.
clients,
It's
but
good.
it is, I think that's what marriage and even not marriage, just romantic relationships are for, is they're so good at triggering those little places in us and teaching us where the next thing that we need to learn lives.
If you can find a place of grace and maturity and inner peace, security in a marriage, in a relationship, a monogamous romantic relationship, you've got the world by the balls. That's the most challenging place to learn how to love. Talking to clients who have businesses of their own, they are so patient and so kind and so understanding and so workable and so flexible and so easy to kill with their clients. And I always ask, what's the one power nobody, not even your kids, no client, not your coach, what's the one power she has that nobody else has? They go, what do you mean? What do you mean? I don't know. I say, yes, you do. There's one thing she can do. It's like on her tip of her pinky. And if she pulls it out, you're devastated. And they almost always say, she can gut me. She has a power to hurt me in a way nobody else can hurt me. She has a way of saying things in her anger or her criticism. It can go into cracks that nobody else sees in me. And when that happens, I lose it. I either lose it and disappear in avoidance, or I lose it in my anger, in my retaliation. And so then we go, okay, good. We know you're a rock star everywhere else. Let's talk about all the cracks that she can fill that just make you feel like that. Why does she have the power to hurt you? And it's not because she's good at hurting, although many people are ninjas when it comes to hurting other people, gaslighting them and everything else. They're ninjas. And so we talk about what's in that crack. And it is the unworthiness, it's the self doubt, it's the self criticism. And then sometimes when we hear a criticism, it just fans the flame of shame that we think we already have. And we fight against it. And so I call that the lipstick tube of whoop ass. It's like a James Bond tube. I said, go into her lipstick. Every woman has a drawer with lipstick tubes she doesn't use anymore, and grab the one you think is the one and put it in your pocket and take the power back and say, now she can't hurt me anymore. I'm free to love her because now when she's doing that stuff, it's gonna be like Teflon. I know she doesn't mean it. It'll be like my kid said, Daddy, you're a stupid poopy head. You're the worst daddy ever. I hope you die. And sometimes kids get horrible like that. But
But they
even
don't
then he
take it
goes,
on.
no, but he goes, don't be late for dinner. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But if your partner says that, put a knife in me, I'm done.
Yeah.
Or fork or whatever the metaphor is.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have to work on that, on the shame that when people criticize you, it amplifies your own feeling of that.
Yeah. But that's, you talked about looking at the divorce, your divorce, as this was supposed to happen. And I know it was because it
Yeah.
did. And now what do I learn? How do I grow? What do I take away? And I think that's what all of that hurt, that reactivity in marriage is for, right? Because every time I
Yeah.
feel triggered or reactive because of something he did or said or the tone of his voice when he got home, that's showing me exactly where that crack is in my own self-worth, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, I thought I had worked. Oh nope, there's still something there that needs my attention, that needs my awareness, that needs to be healed or grown or so really that's how I that's my approach to um, success in a marriage is
Yeah.
not to, because I don't think it's really possible, maybe for some people eventually, to always stay in that place of real like peace, compassion, empathy, calm. Instead, I really try to look at it as what is the opportunity? What is it that I get to learn today? What is this showing
Yeah.
me where I can grow and heal and become uh, more of who I really am? Um, so
And I'm recognizing there's another hour conversation that
yeah,
guys' heads are thinking as they're watching. They're going, yeah, 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 but. And the sentence starts with, "At what point do you need to set a boundary for behavior that's so inexplicably toxic and unacceptable?" You
yeah,
know where this is going. This is a whole
yep.
nother hour conversation of what are the tools you use when things are actually horrible. I mean, really bad. And
That's maybe
so,
the next conversation we should have,
yeah,
Steve, because I mean, the short answer that I give people is that you always get to choose, right? And loving someone doesn't mean you have to tolerate certain actions, words, behaviors. You get to
yeah,
choose what experience to have. And then you can love someone and never see them again. And that's okay too. Um, but
that'll be a fascinating
that's a
conversation.
whole talk. Steve, I can't thank you enough. It's such a pleasure to talk
I
with you and
agree.
thank you
It
for
is a pleasure.
sharing.
Thank you, Rachel.